Welcome, everybody, and thank you for coming to today's Davis Family Lecture. I'm Rick Silva, Associate Professor in the Art and Technology Department, or in the Art and Technology Program here in the Department of Art. And I have the honor of introducing tonight's speaker, Andrew Thomas Wang. First, I'd like to take a moment to recognize that the land that the University of Oregon uses to live and work in is the occupied territory of the Kalapuya people. With today's gathering and the work we do here daily, we acknowledge our occupation and pay respect to the Kalapuya people and the Confederate tribes of the Grand Ronde as the past, present, and future stewards of this land. Tonight's lecture by Andrew Thomas Wang is made possible by the generosity of Gay and Judy Davis, who founded the Davis Family Art Endowment Fund here at the College of Design. Mr. and Mrs. Davis are both graduates of the UO, as are their two daughters, Anne and Marie. They are wonderful supporters of our art students, and we'd like to thank them for this opportunity to bring incredible artists and lectures here every year. So, very excited to introduce Andrew Thomas Wang. Andrew is a filmmaker who crafts hybrid fantasy worlds and mythical dreamscapes. He's a Grammy-nominated music video director. His collaborators include Bjork, F.K. Twigs, and Tom York, among others. He served as creative director for Bjork's VR exhibition, Bjork Digital, and he's created multiple immersive experiences for the pioneering traveling installation. His films have been commissioned by and exhibited at the Museum of Modern Art in New York, the Sydney Opera House, and the Museum of Contemporary Art in LA. Inspired by Chinese heritage and queer Asian mythology and folklore, Wang continues his foray into narrative with his first feature film, Tiger Girl, which I hope to hear a little bit about today, which has received support from Film Independent and the Sundance Institute. He graduated with a degree in fine art and animation from the University of Southern California. I've been a huge fan of his work for probably about a decade now, and feel so fortunate to have him visit here today. And I also feel fortunate that we got to collaborate on a small project last summer, which is up there, right? Have a little piece of it there, so hopefully we'll hear a little bit about that as well. So please give a warm welcome to Andrew Thomas Wang.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be here. Thank you, Rick, for that introduction. So today I'm going to be talking to you about queer morphologies and digital spirits. When I talk about queer morphologies, this is a term that I have defined as inhabited forms, avatars, and personas that expand the embodied imagination. I came up with this term because I was thinking about my childhood, thinking about the books, movies, and TV that I absorbed, and like Star Wars and Lord of the Rings, and feeling kind of like I could never identify with the protagonists. I always felt like the aliens and the robots in the background were somehow more relatable for me. Maybe it's because I wasn't represented on screen, but I just feel like I needed a term to figure out how to centralize those identities, and this is a theme that I'll be talking about as I go through this talk. And when I say queer morphologies, I define queerness as the transgression of boundaries. I'm going to be talking a lot about enmeshment and hybridity, which kind of I put into this category. Locating the body as a site of liberation, and challenging the power structures that engender us. I'm also going to be talking about digital spirits. I'm going to be talking about how technology can serve as a conduit space for spiritual inhabitants, or how spiritual and ancestral knowledge could be a technology itself in the form of number systems and data storage. This intersection of queerness, spirituality, and technology provides opportunity to challenge Western ontological frameworks that form the foundation of existing power structures. And it can provide fertile ground for the new modes of storytelling. One inspiration for me is this book called Geontologies by queer writer, thinker, filmmaker Elizabeth Povinelli. In the second chapter of Povinelli's book, they write, "Can rocks die?" This may sound silly to some of you, but this is actually a really important question for us to investigate, especially when she brings up the chapter, this instance involving a sacred site in Northern Australia called Two Women Sitting Down. In 2013, the Aboriginal Areas Protection Authority sued the mining company OM Manganese Limited for the deliberate desecration of this sacred site. This is important because this is the first case in which the destruction of a sacred site was successfully prosecuted under Australian law. This is significant if we consider the history of instances in which Indigenous tribes tried and failed to defend themselves against the desecration of their land in Australian court, based on the Western understanding that things like rocks, trees, and rivers are non-sentient and therefore have no rights. Or as Povinelli writes, Australian courts simply assume that non-life has no capacity to intend, desire, or seek. They simply assumed that Indigenous men and women had a cultural belief about things rather than probing the analytics of their existence. For the Kunapa tribe, two women sitting down harbored thousands of years of ancestral knowledge. They were dreamings who observed, listened, and even smelled the sweat of Aboriginal people as they passed by hunting, gathering, camping, or just living about their daily lives. Povinelli coins the term Gianto power, which they define as a set of discourse, affects, and tactics used in late liberalism to maintain or shape the coming relationship of the distinction between not life and non-life. Or if I were to paraphrase, it's simply power based on the distinction between what's living and not living. This is an important distinction that we need to make, especially as we consider our current climate crisis, especially now when the role of human beings is being diminished, and we are shifting our focus now to the agency and consciousness of non-human beings. For example, the author Timothy Morton writes in his book Hyperobjects that things like all the radioactive plutonium in the world, all the plastics in the ocean, these things will outlive our species by hundreds of thousands of years. And he calls these things the last gods because they're going to require intergenerational stewardship for us to deal with them in the far future. This perspectival shift parallels the idea of animism, which is defined as the attribution of living soul to plants, animals, inanimate objects, and natural phenomena. Povinelli takes this case of two women sitting down and uses it as a compelling argument why animist ideas are increasingly relevant. Povinelli writes, "Is it possible to assert that two women sitting down and other existence like her should matter equally to or as much more than a form of human existence? And if the answer is yes, then how do we consider these non-human existences in our approach to storytelling?" And I think this offers an exciting opportunity to reframe the narrative. I ask, is it possible to decenter humans as the protagonists in our narratives while still telling stories with powerful emotional resonance? How can we give all forms, living and non-living, agencies in the stories we tell and the worlds we build? I actually have a background in animation, puppetry, and visual effects. And I'm really interested in mixed media storytelling because I think it just, for me at the time when I was young, I was gravitated towards these things because they offered opportunity to tell stories where human beings are not at the center. Or maybe they offered opportunity to tell interior stories more about psychological and emotional experiences than just straight live action can do. And I also think maybe it was because, again, I didn't quite see myself represented on screen, and puppetry was a safer way for me to be involved or to somehow be part of the story by proxy. And so in 2011, I actually started my first experimental short film. I had been working as a commercial music video director for 4 years prior to that and graduated from art school. But having worked for 4 years, I really missed the rigor of the art program, and I wanted to make an experimental film that was non-narrative with 3 acts that told stories about these non-human, non-representational beings that were something between geological and biological. They were genderless, macro, micro, plant, animal, non-living hybrids. Again, they were queer morphologies. They were something that challenged my idea of what could be the center of a story. And I was also really interested at the time by a lot of frankly, like maximalist sculptors who really actively defied a lot of the minimalist stuff that we'd been taught in school. So this is just an excerpt from the film. And each chapter features 2 or more characters that are kind of becoming enmeshed with each other, forming like a single consciousness. So after I made this film, I got contacted by the Icelandic artist Björk, and we ended up working on our first music video together in 2012. The music video was Mutual Core from her album Biophilia, and the song was about tectonic plates and just the phenomenon of geological shift. And again, this is just an example of abstract natural phenomena as the protagonist of this story. In this case, we have rocks that are with strata that are kind of licking each other. And the song for Björk was also trying to use the metaphor of tectonic plate shift with human relationships, where the friction of geological strata could be a metaphor for a romantic human relationship. And so, I think it was just an opportunity to tell this story about, basically with an animist premise.
A mutual
Again, the idea of enmeshment and hybridity being a central theme in this video. All of this was created using Adobe After Effects and Maya. My next project after this, I was contacted by Radiohead frontman Thom Yorke, who had a solo project called Atoms for Peace, which he had written while he was living in LA. Again, this idea of geological strata becoming the center of the narrative. Here we have topographic lines and land erosion itself becoming the central protagonist of this story. This is a test that we did. And the reason we came up on this theme is that, I think Thom Yorke has always been a climate activist through his career, and LA being this, Southern California being a place that's just increasingly drying out. There is a kind of climate anxiety and this idea of civilization collapse that was central to this album. And so I had the idea of Thom being like a crumbling statue from a collapsed civilization, singing as he's kind of sinking into this eroding earth. And so it was an opportunity to tell this story as if it was set in deep time. And we even shot Thom at half speed so that he appeared, all of his nuances of his movement appeared jittery and unnatural. Aside from, I think, this fixation I had with like rocks and geology, I also was experimenting just purely virtually with other sculptures and forms at this time. And I just decided to really turn my focus away from physical work and really focus more on pure virtual models This one is actually, this series I actually made with a combination of photogrammetry scans of bones and skulls. I actually have a skull collection at home, and I thought I would give these bones like a reincarnation into these digital fetish objects. Again, these kind of queer hybrids, something between plant and animal. Some of these are also like plant scans that I did. And I was also really interested in like Japanese lacquer work. And I wanted them, again, to feel kind of like these, like divine fetish objects. And they soon became anthropomorphized and turned into these like cyborg avatars. And I realized at the time, I wasn't really thinking too hard about it. I was just making what I wanted to make. But in retrospect, I realized that these were kind of a form of digital drag. And I think that eventually, I think this idea of a cyborg really brought me to Donna Haraway's essay, A Cyborg Manifesto from 1984. Donna writes, "By the late 20th century, our time, a mythic time, we are all chimeras, theorized and fabricated hybrids of machine and organism. In short, we are cyborgs. The cyborg is a creature in a post-gender world. The cyborg appears in myth precisely where the boundary between human and animal is transgressed. The second leaky distinction is between animal and human, organism and machine. The cyborg myth is about transgressed boundaries, potent fusions, and dangerous possibilities. A cyborg world might be about lived social and bodily realities in which people are not afraid of their joint kinship with animals and machines, not afraid of permanently partial identities and contradictory standpoints." Again, I think it's interesting the way, all the way back in 1984, Haraway pinpoints the cyborg as a location for queer identity. It was an opportunity to reinvent gender and to create something totally in between. And I wanted, at this time, to give these cyborgs that I was creating a stage to operate on. And so I made this project called Flesh Nest in 2017, which I kind of coined as like a 9-part digital opera, a sort of purgatory where the cyborgs could enact a catalog of motion capture behaviors. And at this time, I was reading the writings of Ingrid Burrington, who's an amazing artist and writer in New York, who was talking about internet infrastructure, zooming into a vortex into the distance, or clouds, or really a lot of mystic imagery. And it made me think a lot about how a lot of religious imagery, also kind of maps out celestial realms in this way. And so I wanted to create this piece in which like the 9 levels of hell. I did this too at a time when I was starting to just experiment more with DIY motion capture. This was done using perception neuron suits. And this was also a time in which I was getting a bit tired of doing such visual effects heavy projects and was really interested in using the actual aesthetics of visual effects in the work itself. It felt a little bit more honest to show the themes of what I was doing. Like, for example, none of this was really rendered. It was all done in OpenGL. So I think just, game aesthetics and unfinished visual effects was something I was really embracing for this project. I took this work that I was doing with Flesh Nest and I brought it to my last project with Bjork, in which it became sort of like a cyborg ballet. This song was called The Gate, and it's very much about a relationship between two people, but not quite in a romantic way, but in a spiritual way. And so it was an opportunity to take these cyborg avatars, these queer bodies, and turn them into almost like these digital spirits. And here, again, we have a non-human protagonist, which is light itself. The physics of light itself is the main character of this story, featuring Björk being prismatically fractured into all these different avatars.
I care for you, care for you. Care for you, care for you.
I also brought, again, this aesthetic to my last music video for FKA Twigs. In this case, the cyborg is an objective, that this idea of a queer hybrid sphinx is actually a representation of what Twigs idealizes or strives to be. So in a way, this queer body becomes the object of desire. In 2017, after I had finished Last Nest, I felt, again, like really tired of visual effects. I was getting really exhausted by the workflow. It's just, for any of you that do this kind of work, it is backbreaking and it's often not very well paid, and it's just hard to mobilize projects like that at that scale. And I also felt like a lot of what I was making was very formal. I felt like I wasn't really putting as much as my like emotional investment in it, which kind of bothered me. And it was also the year Trump was inaugurated, and around that time it was Chinese New Year, and I felt compelled to really think about where me and my family came from, our immigration story, and I think I had been running away from actually using that in any of my work. And I think it's actually partly because I grew up with parents that were very active as Asian Americans in the 60s and 70s, and would always talk to me about our story, and I always would get dragged to like Asian American film festivals, and I think I was so worried about being painted into a corner and didn't feel quite safe like using this work, using that part of my identity in the work. But that year I think I felt really I guess just called to hang out with my family that January, and so I actually went to visit my grandparents my grandmother and her siblings on Chinese New Year, and I was thinking a lot about the Chinese restaurant that my family had for 40 years in Gardena in Los Angeles, and we had a giant Guan Yu statue. Guan Yu is the Chinese god of war you see here. And I had the idea of virtualizing him almost like into almost like turning him into a queer cyborg, or almost making him like a digital avatar of him. And I filmed my grandmother and her siblings and made this piece called Firecock, because 2017 was the year of the fire rooster. Oops. And so I videoed my grandmother and her siblings swirling these mahjong blocks. I thought their hands looked really beautiful. Here, the hands of my relatives swirl mahjong blocks, trying their luck as they summon Guan Yu, the god of war, presiding over a changing mediascape. A live Facebook feed of emoji reactions scroll by with icons of war, signaling the violence my family fled to escape, while also heralding the violence to come in the wake of the new administration. There felt something uncanny and prescient that Lunar New Year of 2017, when the president had license to openly replicate the xenophobic rhetoric and authoritarian attitudes parallel to the tactics used by Mao Zedong himself. Coming here to America was a gamble, and my family took its chances. And here, perhaps the god of war was their one constant, a shepherd and protector in the tumult of the changing political landscape. And it was around this time, too, that I began paying attention to what other Asian diaspora were doing. I actually had the pleasure recently, just a couple weeks ago, of meeting artist Lawrence Leck here, who made a video essay called Sinofuturism. This is a term that certainly owes itself to Afrofuturism and other futurisms like Gulf futurism. But in this essay, Lek basically defines China reimagined as a post-human intelligence. These are stills from that video essay, and I'm going to actually read to you his definition of Sinofuturism. He writes, Sinofuturism is an invisible movement, a specter already embedded into 1 trillion industrial products, 1 billion individuals, and 1 million veiled narratives. It is a movement not based on individuals, but on multiple overlapping flows of populations, of products, and of processes. Because Sinofuturism has arisen without conscious intention or authorship, it is often mistaken for contemporary China, but it is not. It is a science fiction that already exists. By embracing 7 key stereotypes of Chinese society, computing, copying, gaming, studying, addiction, labor, and gambling, it shows how China's technological development can be seen as a form of artificial intelligence. And I think we can see some of Lek's ideas here in other examples, such as the city of Tianducheng, in which European landmarks have been mimicked to a T. In a way, this is the city of the real fake. Or we have artists like Liu Yang, who use Chinese mythology and spirituality, combining that with icons from pop culture to create these virtual dystopias. Or the media artist A Jiao, who creates interactive work that invites users to participate in its critique of censorship, capitalism, and the ways in which internet infrastructure mirrors and consolidates existing power structures. I was also following a lot of the criticism in the wake of this essay. This is an excerpt from a great piece written by Gary Zhang, who writes, without an indigenous methodology, Sinofuturism orbits around a Euro-American planet, manifesting either as a diasporic fantasy or a nightmarish return to the colonial repressed. What is at stake in Sinofuturism is not only the decentering of Euro-American cultural hegemony, but also the narrative of futurity as a historical modern aesthetic, which China might recast in its own image. Sinofuturism is hardly a utopian project, but it presents a geopolitical opportunity. How might Orientals take control of the narrative of Orientalism? And I have my definition of Sinofuturism, which is an aesthetic practice and philosophy for constructing reimagined histories and speculative futures for Sino-diaspora. Sinofuturism draws from indigenous Chinese heritage and culture to invent new narratives and unlock opportunities for new forms of inhabitants, embodied imagination, and self-reinvention. It's this idea of indigenous methodology that really inspired me, and I was thinking again a lot about my memories growing up, going to Chinatown, and I remember Chinese lions are, a unique practice specific to southern China. And I remember on Chinese New Year, going to restaurants and being scared out of my mind of these lion dances. And so I decided, again, to virtualize these Chinese lions into these, again, queer hybrid avatars, like these digital gods. And I worked with a local lion dance troupe, actually, that was based right near where my dad grew up in Chinatown in LA. And they're called East Wind, and they're a nonprofit that's been around for 40 years, teaching local youth how to do martial arts and how to do lion dancing. It was a way to give the kids extracurricular activities, and this is actually what we made together. I filmed this in their rehearsal room, and again hooked them up to the motion capture suits I was using. And I think there's something really important that this motion capture is done with the bodies of kids who grew up in this area. They're Chinese American kids. They're not like professional line dancers. And I think there's something really great that, it's the actual motion of these descendants of immigrants that are turned into ones and zeros and are used to bring these ancient deities to life. Here's another excerpt. So again, can we take ancient mythology, turn them into these genderless queer cyborgs and bring them to life using human input. My next project was a collaboration with the Chinese performance troupe Asian Dope Boys, led by Qianzhou Chen from Beijing. They were passing through LA, and we decided to work together on this piece for the Venice Biennial. I brought them into the studio and recorded their performance and created these like exoskeleton avatar suits that they were kind of enmeshed in. And the suits were inspired by Tang Dynasty ceramics. And here's the final project. It's like a 2-part triptych that was installed in Venice. And I decided to place these like avatar gods in like a CG strip mall, kind of hearkening to like the San Gabriel Valley, which is a heavily Chinese area in LA filled with strip malls. And I thought maybe this commercial strip mall could be the stage for these like cyborg deities. I've been sharing a lot of my digital artwork, but ultimately my focus is writing and directing. And while I was doing a lot of music videos, I was still plotting and scheming to make my more narrative work. And it wasn't until 2018 that I was given the opportunity by the culture platform Nowness, who had a small budget and said they wanted me to participate in a series called Define. So the previous year they had Define Beauty, where they invited directors to interpret the theme of beauty. And that year they wanted to do Define Sex. And they asked me to do a story involving queer Asian characters. And at first I felt very, I think just vulnerable and a little scared and shy to do it. But then I thought, well, I actually haven't really attempted that. So I actually was thinking about what to write about, and I was actually in I was actually in Mexico City, and there is an exhibit there on the Aztec god Xochipilli, who's the Aztec god of flowers and the patron saint of homosexuality. And so I thought, wow, like that's so beautiful. Is there a god of homosexuality in Chinese mythology? And I actually found that there are many instances of queerness in Chinese mythology, but that they've been pretty erased. But the one kind of great example I could find was the rabbit god. And there's actually a temple dedicated to this deity in Taiwan, which you see here on the right. And I actually had the pleasure of screening the film when it was finished at the temple. But so I thought that I would tell a story in this short film about a Chinese American restaurant worker that falls in love with this Qing Dynasty god, who visits him at night and leads him on a journey of sexual awakening. And I thought that I would render this god almost like a K-pop star, or just something really contemporary to give it a fresh reinvention, again, as like a queer, in a queer form. And I thought I would bring my family's history in the Chinese restaurant business as a central stage in the story. And we looked all around LA for like Cantonese restaurants, which are kind of a dying breed because most of the first wave of immigration were Southern Chinese immigrants. So they're just harder to find these days. But we found this great place that looked a lot like our restaurant. These are overhead drawings I do before I do any production. I work with the cinematographer to do a layout plan. And I do, I'll take location photos and actually draw over them to show what's in the foreground, midground, and background with my crew. So again, I think having an art degree just in drawing and painting is just really helpful for all kinds of work here. I just use drawing all the time to communicate visually with my crew. It saves me from having to explain things in words when I don't have them. And this is us shooting in the restaurant, and here's what the final frame looks like. This was also, I think, a big step for me because I was just so used to working with musicians, making them look amazing and sexy and stylish, and yet I hadn't actually taken the opportunity to do that for people that looked like myself. So it was really empowering and vulnerable at the same time. This is my cinematographer, Rena Yang. I also wanted all the symbolism in the film to be heavily researched. So the rabbit god has like a tattoo on this keloid scar on his chest, And I made this mandala out of inspiration from a William Blake quote, which is eternity is in love with the productions of time. And so I thought maybe like I could use ancient Chinese seal script with the symbol of immortality in the center, surrounded by the symbol for love. And I thought maybe like every time this god has been reincarnated or has been fallen in love, a new scar appears in this mandala. Or here I use the double happiness symbol, which is the common symbol for love and marriage on the main character's pelvis, filling up with blood at the end of the film. And here again, like we have a non-human actor, which is blood itself, as a central character in this film, which I realized made it kind of like a vampire movie, which I'm not mad at. But like, I think that I just didn't want to make a romance. It felt like a bit twee, and I don't know. I also wanted to portray a sex scene not in like two people humping in the dark. Like I wanted to make something that felt like we were being taken into this other dimension. Again, maybe the spiritual realm could be a place. It could be a technology itself, or technology like with this LED background could be like a space for spiritual inhabitants. I actually got a ton of fan art from the internet after I released this, which I was really happy about. And it also just reinforced like, yeah, there is an audience out there for this kind of work, which I was very happy about. And also, this film, screening this around LA and in different cities, brought me in contact with a lot of other queer Asian community. And I was just really happy to finally meet people that I've had this kinship with. And it was actually at one of the screenings we did in LA that was one of the first times that my friends and I decided to create a queer nightclub, a queer Asian nightclub called Q&A. And this is some of the flyer artwork I made for it. 2020 was the year of the metal rat in the Chinese zodiac. So I made these metal rat, like sex toy flyer artwork. And I also just made a lot of other queer friends, Asian friends and family who I did portraits of and, adorned them with a lot of, again, like researched motifs. And it was an opportunity to really like deify them and celebrate them. It was also this time when the pandemic really hit LA in March, and I realized that I just couldn't shoot really as a way of continuing to tell stories. I also hadn't ever injected myself into my work, so this was kind of a vulnerable opportunity to do that. But here I took the metal rat kings. There's one for north, south, east, and west, and then the central dragon king and the yellow dragon in the center. And so I did this portrait series during the pandemic in 2020, sort of like imagining myself as each of these dragon kings, but in the far future, almost like they're these like cyborg avatars that survived the end of the world and used Taoist talismans as a form of like communication technology. So I took the talismans and turned them into CG models. A lot of these having to do with evil warding or spirit possession. And again, I was just really attracted to the idea that script or symbols can be a way for bodies to become spiritually inhabited. Again, this idea of enmeshment, like the ghost can enter you if you just have the right code. And I turned these symbols into 3D objects that I uploaded onto Sketchfab, which is a social media 3D model site, which I highly recommend. It's free. You can upload your own stuff there. And I think about the importance of archiving because, again, I wouldn't have any access. As someone who doesn't speak Chinese, I wouldn't have any access to this if someone hadn't documented it. I also learned about color symbolism in Taoism, particularly for example, here is the Eastern dragon, which has the color blue-green. And as some of you know, like when we look at color and linguistics, it's the distinction between blue and green that came later. And here the Eastern dragon's element is wood. So I made like a wooden avatar, again, with my photogrammetry scan here on Sketchfab. And one of my most recent readings that I've been really excited about is this book called Digital Spirits and Religion and Media by Alvin Ng-Hui Lim. And in this book, Alvin investigates this festival called the Nine Emperor Gods Festival, celebrated in Southeast Asia, particularly in Singapore and Malaysia. And here in this festival, Alvin talks about how technology is used seamlessly with this festival, not just to document it, but also to actually disseminate information, spells, charms, talismans, blessings. People can make offerings to their ancestors digitally, as well as writing on script and placing it on like a burning boat that they send off into the ocean. There's also spirit possession is an important part of this festival, and they'll document it with drones, their iPhones. So again, I think what's really inspiring about this book is it really highlights how in other cultures, technology and spirituality are not mutually exclusive, that these two things can coexist together. I was also really interested in spiritual body mapping. This is a map of Neijing 2, which literally translates to as the inner landscape. Again, like, can one's spiritual life have a geography? Again, and is there a way for technology to actually create this inner landscape? And so this led to my one of my more recent photo series where I photographed myself almost like I was being possessed by this technology, where I think sometimes we think of ancestors in this diagrammatic 2D tree, but could I actually present ancestry in the form of luminance as like a gold kind of shimmering sculpture that has like a USB cable tethered to my head? Or here the mythological Chinese pearl of wisdom could be, again, like tethered to a dongle and like fixed to my cranium in the shape of the Chinese longevity symbol. And again, these symbols have ancient Taoist origin, and I was just really interested in presenting these ideas as a technology. Or here, for example, there are folk tales about Buddhist sutras being used as protective charms to render someone invisible. And here is just like some video, again, showing my process creating this jewelry in Maya and ZBrush. And here is like an altar. Again, thinking about like ancestral altars. We actually took a trip back to my family's village in Toi San, which is 2 hours from Hong Kong, and actually found our ancestral shrine just sitting there collecting dust in our empty ancestral house, which my great uncle actually still pays someone to keep the house clean for the dead. And I was just thinking about how an ancestral shrine could be itself a technology, a portal where we can access ancestral data. And here, this is a sculpture that I did. It's called a bagua, which I'll explain in just a moment. The Chinese bagua translates literally as the 8 trigrams. Those are those broken and straight lines you see surrounding the yin-yang symbol. And you'll notice that they appear on the Korean flag. But each of these represents a principle of reality, and when combined form 64 hexagrams. And the 64 hexagrams correspond to a book of parables called the I Ching. And the I Ching is almost like a form of Chinese tarot reading. And Alvin Lim points out that this is basically a form of binary code. Alvin writes, trigrams produce networks simply by operating as nodes where the gods pass their visions and energies to human subjects with the right access codes. Gods are only accessible when human agents enact the trigrams and numbers and use them as codes and passwords to tap into the divine sphere. In other words, through numbers, the god in the machine speaks. And so I was really interested in this idea of the I Ching as like basically a system of ones and zeros. And so I combined them to create this piece called Mutant Bagua, which is actually a piece that I created for Feral File, which was curated by Rick Silva here. I was very excited to participate in this exhibition, and along with the artists that Rick curated. And I decided to kind of, just like think of the Bagua itself as a queer morphology. Mutant Bagua is basically a 3D sculptural reinterpretation of the Taoist Bagua as the machine-spirit interface. In the center is the Chinese pearl of wisdom, engraved with the 5 elements, adorned with the Taoist talisman for opening of the heart. And enshrining enshrining the pearl are the 8 trigrams, each representing a principle of reality translated into binary yin and yang, 0 and 1. This sculptural digitization of ancestral code reinvents the form as a hybrid mutant sci-fi abstraction reminiscent of queer robotics, drones, and imagined extraterrestrial technology. And so by uploading this ancient Taoist script into virtual form, this mutant Bagua kind of serves as like an ancestral portal to digital spirits that haunt the interface between structural code and digital data. And I decided to make this an AR piece because I feel like people consult the I Ching in this very personal way, the same way you might consult tarot. And so I thought it'd be really nice to have a personal dimension to this where people could take the Bagua onto their own device and put it in their own space. This is also the first piece that I minted through Feral Files Bitmark system. And so that was also an interesting new experience for me to actually be able to sell this work as a digital sculpture. This is video taken from my friend James Murray, who does all of Bjork's mask work, but he kind of took this sculpture and transposed it in AR here in Iceland and in his hometown of Stroud in England on the right. Revisiting heritage also allows us a really exciting opportunity to rethink and correct things about our ancestry that are problematic or things that have been oppressive in the past. Chinese mythology, Chinese culture in general is notoriously misogynistic, and the idea of yin and yang has been so gendered. So I had this idea that maybe mutant Bagua could present an opportunity to reimagine the Taoist binary, thinking of yin and yang not as fixed gender arrival points, but as vectors in motion, data storage and flux that when combined reveal a limitless variety of morphologies and forms. So to summarize, this intersection of queerness, spirituality, and technology offers opportunity to collapse the distinction between life and non-life, creating a spiritual gateway for new consciousness to emerge. It allows opportunity for divisions between humans, animals, plants, minerals, machines, the living and the dead to converge to form hybrid actors on a new stage, chimeras in a world that has already ended. It reveals that our ancestors are not behind us, but ahead of us. And they leave behind numbers that, when combined, reveal an infinite spectrum of possibilities. Or, as Lao Tzu riffed 2,000 years ago, Tao produced the one produced the two produced the three, and the three produced the 10,000 things. Thank you very much. Does anyone have any questions? Yeah.
How did you form connections after college? I know that you graduated animation and everything. How did you kind of get where you are today with doing these productions?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, I went to art school. I studied drawing and painting, and then I ended up making this short film in my dorm. And I put it on YouTube when YouTube was only 2 years old. That kind of dates me, but it was back when they would feature like 5 videos a week. And so it went viral, and I had a ton of agencies and production companies reach out to me after that. The truth is I was so unprepared. I didn't even know how to take a meeting. I think that it was great to have the opportunity with people reaching out, but I admit I wasn't ready to tackle them. So I think if you ever have work take off like that, it's great, but you're not always going to be ready for it. And so it kind of passed in this wave. And then I pretty much I used it as an opportunity to, I think I was just eager to work. So I did get an agent, and I think they put me in touch with various other people, and I felt like I didn't quite know what I wanted to do. I knew I wanted to make movies, but I didn't have a script ready. And so I knew that some people got into directing through like commercials and music videos, and those are some of the directors that I admired growing up, like Chris Cunningham and Spike Jonze. And so I thought, okay, maybe I'll do commercials and music videos. But like I didn't know where to start, so I literally like just found a friend's band and was like, hey, can I make a video for you? You know, I'll do it for free. And then I found like a small commercial production company that was literally like a trailer in an alley in Hollywood. And like I worked there for 4 years just doing like really just grunt animation work. But I think at least like, this was also in 2008 when the crash happened. So it was just a bad time to get anything off the ground. And I think it was a good experience just to work and get, you know, some kind of income, but I would save that and reinvest it in my own art projects. And so it became the struggle of like investing in my personal work and then doing my daytime pay the bills work. And you know what? That struggle doesn't stop. You just get to a point where you have to really invest in that personal work on a day-to-day basis for it to grow. And that's why the first short film I showed you was like my first Kickstarter piece. And it was after a time where I'd worked with enough people where I was able to say like, hey, I'm really tired of making like baby food commercials. Do you want to make something cool, you know? And so I found my favorite people and like rallied them together so that we could invent something special together. So I think it was also like a matter of community building as well. So it was step by step. Yeah, I hope that explains things. Yeah. Any other questions? Mm-hmm.
You talk about mixing the virtual and spiritual.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry.
Like strange, like spiritual slippages. Yeah. I have some weird, spooky stories. I have a moment so I made this Rabbit God movie, and then I went to Taipei to go to the actual temple. And while I was there, I was so nervous. I think because I felt like, oh no, I made this film about you, your God, and I hope you like it, you know? So I was really like, I just wanted to show respect. So I got like a bamboo plant, I brought it. I ended up like spilling water on their floor. I was so embarrassed. And like finally, they were really nice. They had like a cat. It was like a bunch of young kids working there actually. And they showed me how to pay respects. And the way you do it is you grab with your left hand like the incense and you pay respects to the entire pantheon before you get to the Rabbit God. And when I kneeled at the Rabbit God altar, my phone rang, or like someone texted me. And it was like the actor who played the god, and he hadn't talked to me in like a year and a half at that point. And I was just like really spooked, you know? And then the actual priest there said like, oh, like the Rabbit God brought you here. Like he's the one that reached out to you, and he's the reason why you made this film. And I can't really argue with that, you know? Like, again, I found about this god through Wikipedia. You know? So like, again, the God in the machine speaks. You know, so that was like a cool moment. Yeah.
I really loved your conversation. I loved the discussion at the beginning of kind of the new materialism. And what struck me as really interesting is that a lot of your concerns are kind of what we think about as academic concerns, and yet a lot of your success is commercial success, so you have kind of both. And it seems pretty amazing to be able to maintain the importance of that kind of theoretical underpinning and theoretical thinking, but also like maybe Bjorg is like the type of commercial artist that actually would love to discover someone like yourself to work with.
Yeah.
But I wonder if you could talk about that, because it seems it seems like a really interesting thing that you've managed to retain the importance of throughout your work. Yeah,
thank you. Yeah, I don't know. I think going to art school was so. I mean, before art school in high school, I wanted to work in movies, and I didn't want to work. I didn't care so much about theory and all that. But when I went to art school and also just at General University, I was really, like the best classes I took in college were Chinese religions and some of the gender studies courses. And I think how grateful I am that I could do that at a General University. And I think like criticality, I just feel it's like it's our job, you know, to make work that is transgressive, that actually challenges things because, and so when I first started getting these commercial opportunities, I found that those considerations just didn't exist, you know. It's a market, which is fine, but I did grow up like admiring people like Bjork or Chris Cunningham or again, some of these artists that could walk that line because I think that the rhythm of commercial working allows you a platform to amplify your work. And now we're at a time when like that division is really blurry. You know, we have Red Bull that was like a huge patron of the arts and continues to be. And I think that that distinction of like selling out versus, you know, creating like, or selling out versus not selling out is kind of an older idea, but maybe it's because we've become more enmeshed in the straitjackets of capitalism, you know? So like, I don't know. I think that, I guess I've enjoyed being amphibious, you know? And I think that commercial work teaches you craft. It teaches you to be fluid because you're problem solving all the time. But I don't ever want to lose the criticality. And I think that, yeah, it's hard. It's a hard tightrope to walk. And I think like people like Bjork managed to do it because she's an entrepreneur. You know, she's basically a small family operation, and she left Universal Music Group, I think about like over a decade ago. So she's not like, you know, rolling in cash. She's really like a truly, independent operation. So it allows her and me to work slower, whereas like other music videos, they go so fast. Record labels move on such a tight deadline that you never have time to think and talk about what you're making. So you just blow like hundreds of thousands of dollars on some really dumb stuff. I mean, great stuff. It's fun. I don't want to. It's just like what these are kind of like comparing different fruits and vegetables, right? Like there's different foods we enjoy, but like, and I think they all are important. But I think that I like talking about work. I just think this work is so expensive. So if we're going to invest money in it, let's actually make it challenging. That's my personal opinion. Any other questions? I'm sorry, could you, what software? I was using ZBrush, and I use a photogrammetry scanner called Agisoft Photoscan, and then I use Maya a lot, and Photoshop. And like the whole Adobe Creative Suite. I've been trying to make a movie for 5 years. It's going well, but slowly, and I'm learning that we're financing right now. We have our cast, but I'm learning that it's still really conservative out there in the film market. Like it's been great that we've had movies like Minari and Crazy Rich Asians, which changed things. But I think it was hard to make movies before the pandemic, and now it's just gotten harder. There's a bottleneck in production right now. The labor shortage we're all seeing is affecting film as well. So I'm just realistic that it may not be till 2023, you know? So I'm just continuing to write and do short-term gigs if they're a music video or maybe even directing some television. But yeah, I think that's why I have like a smattering of digital art in combination with my narrative work, because the narrative work just moves so slowly. So the digital work is a way to keep thinking and staying busy and making things while I wait. I'm also happy to answer any questions pertaining to your own work. I know many of you here are artists in the program, so if you have any questions about your own projects, I'm also happy to advise. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.